I told out the
Alright.
treachery.
Yep.
Staring me, him from Lynn.
Okay.
Althea told me,
Well,
cool down.
alright. Needed a little bit of calm and chill music because, I found this yesterday and it fucking enraged me. And I can probably kind of work up the anger to here in a second, but it enraged me, but it didn't surprise me, right? So, you know, uh, I'm a lower class guy. I don't make a lot of money. I don't understand when people start talking in the tunes of millions and billions and trillions. That concept is so just outside of my purview because people like me, you could do so much with these amounts of money that, to a large degree, they kind of just get lit on fire. And it's crazy. It makes no sense to me. I don't understand it. But so this is what I wanted to dive into today, right? So research and development in the pharmaceutical industry, R&D is where most taxpayers' dollars go to these big pharmaceutical companies, and public dollars, private profits. There's insane amounts of money, right? All right, so check it out. Just one example. We can go through this. Oncology News Central. I have the NIH reporter. I have stuff from Oregon. I think this is a representative. Yeah, House Rep. Uh, Institute for New Economic Thinking. Like, I have a couple different articles that I want to go through today. And while I read through these, just let me find here. Hold on. I want to fix this because I want anybody who watches this to be able to see. I'm going to make myself smaller. I'll put myself up here, and that should open up the actual article itself. All right, so public dollars, private profits. Cancer drugs costs sky high despite taxpayer funding. The United States spends billions funding early-stage oncology drug research and development, but taxpayers are often left to bear the brunt of some of the highest drug prices in the world. Isn't that funny? A striking example is this of enzalutamide, Xtandi, a prostate cancer drug that was developed with $74.5 million in public funds. Despite this investment, it comes with a staggering annual list price of $189,900. $200,000 for a drug that was produced or developed, same thing, with $74.5 million in public funds. Despite this investment, experts argue that this is not just an isolated case, but it's a glaring example of a broken system in which unchecked drug pricing leaves patients and taxpayers footing the bill. Bishal Gyalwali, MD, PhD, and colleagues used the examples of enzalutamide as a case study published by JAMA Oncology to highlight these broader systemic issues. See, you don't need case studies. This is very fucking simple what's going on. These drug companies, they get an out by our government when it comes to having to drum up capital. I'm not saying taxpayers' dollars pay for everything. Do they? I mean, I don't know. The money isn't all necessarily there, right? Like, we can't... These massive pharmaceutical companies don't show what amount of money they are shelling out to these things. The only thing we can see is how much money the American taxpayer is shelling out to these things. And it's fucking crazy. It's insane to me. So, okay. An oncologist in the Department of Cancer Care and Epidemiology at Sinclair Cancer Research Institute at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and co-authors conclude that U.S. taxpayers often fund early R&D but are left facing some of the highest price burdens. We recommend that policymakers develop more transparent means of accounting for the contributions of public funds to drug development. In 2022, the enzalutamide's list price for the U.S. far exceeded that in Japan, $25,000, Australia $31,000, Canada $32,000, and other high-income countries. In 2021, its U.S. list price was estimated to be 3 to 5 times higher than in the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. Meanwhile, the median return on investment for drug companies is $14.50 for every $1 invested. That's based on one WHO analysis. So Yawali told Oncology News Central, as in the case of Xtandi, often the industry's investment comes after the initial phases, in which the risk of failure is high and which are supported by public funds through research grants. Okay, so they use our money to take all the risk, and any money they put in afterwards is after they can see the first phases of development, which is how the body reacts to it, what effects does it have, you know? I'm not a pharmaceutical expert, okay, but that's just a very simple explanation of how these things work, right? They develop the drug, and then they go through phases of testing. I mean, it's very simple. Pharmaceutical companies are largely unregulated and in setting drug pricing, he said. There's no price control. They're allowed to charge whatever they can, which is fucking wild. Before 2003, $16.5 million from the NIH and Department of Defense directly supported enzalutamide's discovery and early development. By 2012, the cumulative public contributions totaled $74.5 million fucking dollars. Part of the broader drug pricing problem is because the U.S. lacks a single-payer system capable of negotiating prices. A health economist and chief of hematology oncology at Highland Hospital in Oakland, California. No. See, that's the thing, right? Like, see, they're putting this back on the taxpayer. They're saying the U.S. lacks single-payer system, which is going to negotiate prices. No, the government needs to negotiate these. When they write these contracts to these fucking pharmaceutical companies that take our money to develop their drugs that they profit off of. That's the problem. The problem has nothing to do with the fact that the U.S. doesn't have this like socialized healthcare system that takes money from fucking taxpayers. They're already taking our money. They're already getting it. And to what benefit, right? Like you can say, oh, well, the benefit is there's drugs being put out on the market. Yes, but there's drugs that are being put out on the market that are literally putting people in debt. They are bankrupting folks. Not everybody, but that is an issue in and of itself. When the money that people pay out of their own checks to these massive pharmaceutical companies is not being used to actually benefit them, yes, it develops a drug for the drug company that the drug company can sell and make money off of. But we're the ones that are giving them the money, the initial capital. So it's not like these massive companies, and I mean, it says it right up here. This is from the Oncology News Central, okay? So this could be off base, but I don't really see Oncology News Central getting a bunch of flack. I'm just calling balls and strikes here, okay? But it literally says up here, as in the case of Xtandi, now this is one example, all right? This may not be everything, I'm not saying it is. But it's pretty funny how this works. The industry's investment, often the industry's investment, comes after the initial phases in which the risk of failure is high. So they don't even fucking put money in until after they see this is a safe investment. And they're given this cushion by the American taxpayer. And then they profit off of us. Like, if someone ever had a case that the system is fucking rigged, this is it. If I could use taxpayers' dollars to get through the risk of any investment, and then I can put my money in and make money when I know it's a safe investment, that system is rigged in my favor. There's no getting around that, right? It blows my mind this doesn't infuriate more people. You know, I'm the kind of guy where I don't believe in a socialized healthcare system as it's taken out of tax dollars. Like I don't believe in that, and that's simply because, like, if somebody wants to put their money towards that kind of thing as a voluntary tax payment, that's great. That's awesome. You can do whatever the fuck you want with your own money. But no one should be forced, especially when you're in a position like I'm in, right? And this isn't a poor me, I'm broke kind of thing. But it's my money. They are taking money out of my checks and giving it to big pharmaceutical companies so they can make safe investments. Like, we're already paying for socialized health care, but we're being fucked. This doesn't need to be paid from the taxpayers' dollars. They don't need more. That's like, if nobody would ever be able to convince me, no one ever would be able to convince me that it makes sense that taxpayers' dollars should fund the development of these things so these companies can make these drugs, and then taxpayers' dollars should also be allocated to purchasing these drugs from these companies. We already paid for the fucking development. And it's a very, very simple middle ground, right? So I'm a moderate guy. I don't fall too far on the right. I don't fall too far on the left. I'm very kind of in the middle, you know. After going through this, it's made me a pro, pro kind of universal healthcare advocate, but not in the sense that I believe everyone should pay tax money into these kinds of things. And that's simply because we're already fucking paying the tax money. And I'm going to get into all this, by the way. Like, this isn't me just shooting off at the hip. I looked into this yesterday before I went into my night job. It's pretty fucking crazy when you see how much tax money goes to these massive companies, goes to these universities that study this stuff. That's the issue, is, like, the issue is not the money going to them for the research and development. For me, I don't mind that. I already pay it. I'm used to paying it. That's fine. The issue that I find with this, and by and large, this is it, is the fact that our tax money is going to these things, and they're given permission to profit off of it. They set their own fucking prices on everything, when they don't even put up the brunt of the money that is risk. That is not it's not ethical. I mean, bottom line, like, and you know, maybe something like this will come out at some point and people will actually start talking about this. I just think there's too much big pharma money in Congress. They're not going to do anything about this shit. And call me a conspiracy theorist, whatever. I don't give a fuck, man. Like, this is so blatantly obvious and simple and right out in the open. Anyway, so tangent over on that one. Cost containment hasn't been a feature of U.S. healthcare and would require legislation to enact. No, it doesn't require legislation. This is more government bloat that they're advocating for here. That's it. Kevin Knopf, right? He's just advocating for more government bloat. See, you bloat the government with more money, you have them write more legislation, and like, you see these fucking bills they write, some of them. I mean, they're literally like stacks this high. What all's in it? Who knows? You know, are we supposed to like the American people? This is just an opinion, right? Anything that gets passed should be gone through by Congress in a public forum to go through every single piece of every bill. So we have the time to let our representatives know, do we want this passed? Is this something that's going to benefit us? And I think the real issue is, you know, there's so much legalese that's written into all these bills that if you can't explain something simply to your constituents and show them how this is going to benefit them, like go through everything simply. Break it down for a layman. If you can't do that with a bill, don't fucking pass it. It's that easy. It's really a simple concept, right? Like, anyway, the U.S. also lacks health technology assessments to evaluate drug cost effectiveness, which are common in other high-income countries, Gyawali said. He cited in a 2023 study that found that all other G7 countries have HTAs and that the U.S. spends the most even on cancer drugs with minimal clinical development. Efforts to addressing pricing inequities have faced significant obstacles. In 2016, Knowledge Ecology International and the Union for Affordable Cancer Treatment petitioned the NIH and the DoD under the Bayh-Dole Act to authorize a broader manufacturing of enzalutamide. So, what that essentially means is they petitioned so they could have more generics of this drug that would be cheaper, right? Because our Congress regulates this pharmaceutical market so heavily that smaller companies that would develop cheaper alternatives that are the same drug, just a generic, they can't thrive under all these regulations. So they have to go through these massive multi-billion-dollar corporations to make these drugs because they already have the money set back to navigate through these regulations and still be able to develop drugs. But funny enough, these companies are also getting taxpayers' dollars, let's not forget. That would allow the federal government to march in on taxpayer-funded patents and license them to other manufacturers. Why did we have to petition for that? Why did that have to even be a fucking question? The petition was denied. Of course it was, as were subsequent appeals, including the fourth and most recent in March 2023. Shocker. They don't give a fuck about us. Easy. Bottom line. Period. Joseph Allen, executive director of the Bayh-Dole Coalition, defended the denials in company news release, stating that the march-in provision cannot and should not be misused as a price control mechanism for successfully commercialized products. See, that is... Hopefully this puts the nail in the coffin of this canard. NIH deserves a lot of credit for standing up to the incredible political pressure to misuse the law. Go fuck yourself. Gyawali believes that the first step towards controlling U.S. cancer drug prices is establishing an HTA body. More government bloat. Here's the government that gives our tax dollars to these massive pharmaceutical companies. What's the way that we're going to be able to start controlling prices? Give more government more power. Throw some money at them. This is... Look, I'm broke as shit. I've started 2 failed businesses. I'm not an expert. I've never been a successful businessman. Maybe one day, I'm still trying, but even I know a fucking business failure can tell you when you're already shelling money into something, throwing even more into it to regulate it is not going to do anything. Sorry. You need to cut. There needs to be cuts. People need to be held accountable. And he says, there should be some accountability in the pricing of cancer drugs. Then why are you throwing more money into it? When we previously compared the relationship between price and clinical benefit of cancer drugs, we found at least some relationship in Canada versus no or even an inverse in the United States. The company marketing enzalutamide, Astellas, said that the list price do not reflect what most patients actually pay, because they're talking about the relationship between the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical manufacturer. Okay, so the patient doesn't pay that much. That's a copay of their insurance, right? So as of May 2024, 87% of Xtandi prescription cost patients $50 or less regardless of insurance type. But how much are they paying in insurance? What's their premium? How does that affect everybody else that's under that same umbrella? That's the thing, right? Like, when you target individual people and you see what the individual people pay, it's not that much. But then when you look at the broader spectrum of all the people that are paying into these insurance policies, because when I pay a premium on my insurance is paying for other people too. That's the whole concept of insurance, right? This claim, however, is not reflected in the data reported in an analysis published by Urology Practice. Although patients are rarely asked to pay the list price in that study, researchers found that in 2023, insured patients with Medicare Part D drug coverage face a median annual out-of-pocket expense of almost $12,000, right? So, yes, they're only paying $50 a drug or whatever, but the average person, some people are only paying $50 or less, or $50 or less, right? It's saying 87%. But then the median out-of-pocket expense is almost $12,000. That's the average. And the taxpayers' dollars funded this drug being created. I mean, is it that hard to see? It just blows my mind, dude. This discrepancy may be in part because I don't know. Because of copay cards that allow for some patients to pay little to $0, but it varies depending on their insurance and their income. Correct. Copays are what comes out of the patient's pockets, however, he said. The total annual price matters, as that is what the employers or Medicare pay. It is what we all pay, given that we are all funding Medicare. Yes, we're all funding it, right. So when you're taking individual people, you're not taking how much money everyone else is paying for these things. Because I pay into Medicare in my taxes, and I'm not bitching about it. Like, there are people who need this assistance. This does help people. I'm not against it by any stretch. And I'm not against people having some form of health care. But the thing that I'm against is our tax dollars funding the riskiest part of drug development, and then these companies charging us and making massive profits off of this. None of that gets funneled back into helping people acquire the drugs that the taxpayers' dollars are paying for. Our tax dollars are literally just mitigating risk for massive pharmaceutical companies. That's what's going on here. Benjamin Pokros, MD, MBA, a urology resident at Michigan Medicine in Ann Arbor and the first author of the Urology Practice Analysis, said that Astellas may offer a coupon or rebate program to some patients. Indeed, many patients are eligible for these coupons, but certainly not all. For patients without coupons on Medicare Part D plans, the median out-of-pocket costs were described in our study. And studies, who was subject to the study? Like, that's they utilize these words in very funny ways, and they don't offer a criteria on who was chosen in these studies, because, you know, it's funny how they say, well, it's just random people were getting studied, but who is it? I've never been asked to be part of a fucking drug study, right? Now, granted, there are a lot of folks that will sign up for studies because they're offered some form of compensation, but who are these people? It's very simple. Like, when there were lots of studies done during COVID that were entirely fucking wrong. And the one thing the medical industry, that the healthcare industry has not been able to reel back from is how little trust people have in the system. And it's really hard to mitigate that when you put Anthony Fauci as the head of this thing and he got fucking everything wrong. Everything. Coupons are not guaranteed and often require careful coordination from cancer centers. In the absence of a single-payer system, here we go. See, more tax dollars. We need to get more tax dollars into this. That's like that. When people start talking like this, that's all I hear. Knopf suggested that insurers could exert more influence on pricing. Okay, so as long as you start shelling out more tax dollars for this thing, insurers can make you pay less. That's fucking... It's such dog shit. If insurance companies wanted to save money, they would look at these medicines more carefully. For example, abiraterone, Zytiga, likely works as enzalutamide and costs 1% as much. But I have never seen an insurance company ask an oncologist to switch to save costs. So we need more tax dollars so these insurance companies can go, hey, can you switch over to this? No. Why? Because it keeps money flowing through. That's revenue. When an insurance company, even though an insurance company spends money, when they do their revenue reports, if they were to go to these smaller, cheaper drugs, it's going to affect their revenue reports because there's less money going through the company. I mean, it's that simple, you know? Like, and what they're asking for now, what they're trying to allude to with this single payer system bullshit is more taxpayers' dollars going through these systems. That will incentivize them to start looking out for our best interest. So, the forcible taking of the money out of our checks, that they fucking decide. They call the price on it. They're the ones that dictate it. That's going to incentivize them to look out for us. That makes no fucking sense whatsoever. Some changes may already be on the horizon. The NIH recently introduced an intramural research program access planning policy that requires companies seeking licenses for government-funded projects to submit access plans. These plans must be updated as product development progresses. Companies can submit a plan within 3 months of regulatory approval, which the NIH would then distribute. Intramural Research Program Access Planning Policy. What does this even mean? All right. Purpose: NIH is issuing the IRP to expand equitable patient access to products that emerge from NIH-owned patents. I can tell you one thing. This costs taxpayers' dollars. So instead, see, instead of them just doing the thing, instead of the NIH going to these pharmaceutical companies and saying, we funded through taxpayers' dollars this percentage of your capital to develop drug X, Y, and Z, that same percentage of your capital that was paid for by the American taxpayer, that percentage of your profit is going to go back into the system. That's going to pay for treatments. It's going to, help to subsidize premiums or subsidize treatments so they're cheaper for people. It's very, that's not a hard concept to wrap my head around. And all it is a clause in the fucking the government contract these companies write. It's very easy. When the American taxpayer is footing the bill to mitigate the risk on money being lost by pharmaceutical companies, we are all owed something from these motherfuckers, okay? And I know, ever since COVID, it's been the popular thing to glaze the healthcare industry. Well, fuck them. I'm not even getting into like a conspiracy here. This is just what's fucking happening, okay? This is what's happening. And this is one article. I haven't even gotten into the kinds of money. Funny enough, when I was going through just like a breakdown of all the taxpayers' dollars that go into like funding research and development, healthcare, all that, my fucking browser crashed. And it may happen again, but we'll get there. Okay. These plans must be updated as product development progresses. Companies can submit a plan within 3 days, blah, 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 blah. So in Gyalwala's view, the bottom line is that the U.S. needs to rethink drug development for sustainable cancer care. For molecules initially discovered and tested through public funds, should the government be more involved in drug development in some capacity? Not necessarily, man. No, I don't believe that. I don't. I do believe there should be some form of like competitive, incentivized competition in the market, right? And that makes sense. I'm not saying these companies shouldn't be able to turn a profit, but some of these profits need to be given back to the people in just a very like easily explainable way, because what I'm not saying is the overhead. I understand that, and like I can't fathom the money and where all of it needs to go, but I understand that there's overhead for these kinds of things, right? I understand that there's money that has to be put in. There's money that needs to be put up in order for these things to happen. I'm not saying for any of that, the money that's actually put into these things to be cut. What I'm saying is when they develop these things, parts of their profit, the same percentage of their profit that taxpayers' dollars contributed to their capital should be given back to the people. That's a very fair system. I'm not talking about specific dollar amounts. I'm talking about percentages, right? Because honestly, I don't believe that it would be sustainable for medical for the dollar amount that is given to them to be redistributed back to people. No, and I do believe that dollar amounts of American taxpayers' money should be going towards helping to develop drugs. I'm with that. But for these companies, these massive fucking companies, to make, 2022, Pfizer made $31 billion in profit. Where the fuck did that go to help anybody else? Seriously. Where did that go? And you can say, well, they reinvested it back into the thing. That's great, but in a risk-free environment. They invested the profits that they made in the next fiscal year back into safe investments because the risks were mitigated by the American taxpayer. The bottom line is the U.S. needs to rethink drug development for sustainable care, cancer care, blah, 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 blah. For molecules initially discovered and tested through public funds, should the government be more involved in drug development in some capacity? No. Just put a fucking clause. Is that the end of it? Yeah, we don't need to go into that. All right. Just put a clause in whatever government contract you write with these massive, corporations that we are going to fund this amount of your capital. And hate to say it, but if you're 100% funded by the taxpayer, you don't get any fucking profits. You didn't put any money up. You didn't take any risk, right? That's how capitalism works. If it's 50% and you make $2 billion in profit, put $1 billion back into the system. You obviously got more than $1 billion from the taxpayer. But half of your initial development cost was funded by the taxpayer. So give them half the profit. That's a really reasonable way to look at this, I think. I'm pretty unreasonable to a large degree. But I have reasonable takes, I think, right? All right. This is from the CBO.gov, the Congressional Budget Office, right? This is from April 2021. Okay, research and development in the pharmaceutical industry. In 2019, the pharmaceutical industry spent $83 billion on R&D. Adjusted for inflation, that amount is about 10 times what the industry spent per year in the 1980s. Between 2010 and 2019, the number of new drugs approved for sale increased by 60% compared with the previous decade, with a peak of 59 new drugs approved in 2018. The amount of money that drug companies devote to R&D is determined by the amount of revenue they expect to earn from a new drug, the expected cost of developing that drug, and policies that influence the supply and demand for drugs. Now see, the reason this is on the Congressional Budget Office website is because the primary the primary money given out from the NIH to these companies is for research and development, right? That's where all the risk is. The risk is all in the research and development of the drugs. And there's even money going towards the fucking marketing of it, which is wild to me. The expected lifetime global revenues of a new drug depends on the prices that companies expect to charge for the drug in different markets around the world, the volume of sales they anticipate at those prices, and the likelihood the drug development effort will succeed. The expected cost to develop a new drug, including capital costs and expenditures on drugs that fail to reach the market, has been estimated to range from less than $1 billion to more than $2 billion. The federal government influences the amount of private spending on R&D through programs such as Medicare that increase the demand for prescription drugs through policies such as spending for basic research and regulations on what must be demonstrated in clinical trials that affect the supply of new drugs, and through policies such as recommendations for vaccines that affect both supply and demand. Correct. Yes. So, to remove the effects of inflation, the Congressional Budget Office adjusted dollar amounts with the Gross Domestic Product Price Index from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Amounts are expressed in 2019 dollars. Research and development in the pharmaceutical industry. Summary. Each year, the U.S. pharmaceutical industry develops a variety of new drugs that provide valuable medical benefits. Many of these drugs are expensive and contribute to rising healthcare costs for the private sector and the federal government. Policymakers have considered policies that would lower drug prices and reduce federal drug expenditures. Such policies would probably reduce the industry's incentive to develop new drugs. In this report, the CBO assesses trends in spending for drug research and development and the introduction of new drugs. CBO also examines factors that determine how much drug companies spend on R&D, expected global revenues of a new drug, cost to develop a new drug, and federal policies that affect the demand for drug therapies, the supply of new drugs, or both. What are recent trends in pharmaceutical R&D and new drug approvals? The pharmaceutical industry devoted $83 billion to R&D expenditures in 2019. Those expenditures covered a variety of activities, including discovering and testing new drugs, developing incremental innovations such as product extensions, and the clinical testing for safety monitoring or marketing purposes. That amount is about 10 times what the industry spent per year in the 1980s after adjusting for the effects of inflation. Yeah, because, you know, if you were to look at the amount of money they spent on that shit in the 80s, and then you compare that to $83 billion without adjusting for inflation, it would look astronomically bad, right? The share, but they do need to adjust for inflation. And after adjusting for inflation, it's still fucking crazy. 10 times what they spent. The share of revenues that drug companies devote to R&D has also grown. On average, pharmaceutical companies spend about 1/4 of their revenues, net of expenses and buyer rebates, on R&D expenses in 2019, which is almost twice as large as the share of revenues they spent in 2000. So it's 10 times what it was in the 80s, and it doubled since 2000. That revenue share is larger than that for other knowledge-based industries such as semiconductors, technology, hardware, and software. number of new drugs approved each year has also grown over the past decade. On average, the FDA approved 38 new drugs per year from 2010 through 2019, with a peak of 59 in 2018. Okay, so which is 60% more than the yearly average over the previous decade. Here's my question. How many of those drugs that they released between 2010 and 2019 got recalled because of severe side effects? How many? Let's look, shall we? How many FDA approved drugs were recalled between 2010 and 2019? So, our taxpayers' dollars go to research and development to mitigate the risk of failure for massive pharmaceutical companies. And yet, 15,710 medications were recalled between 2010 and 2019. We don't even need to go to an AI overview, right? Let's go to Lightfoot Law, drug recall statistics. No, I'm good. The FDA has the job of preserving the public health, blah, blah, blah. While the FDA's mission is to protect customers, many previously approved items have resulted in recalls, long-term injuries, and lawsuits, calling into question the efficacy of the approval process. Correct. Yeah, I mean, that's basically where I'm going. So, summary of findings. There's been a total of 15,749 drug recalls since 2012, with 15,351 drug recalls specifically happening in the U.S. Okay, so we can go by this number right here. 15,351 drug recalls since 2012. I don't even know when this was written. There have been 2,193 ongoing recalls, 807 completed recalls, okay, and 13,254 terminated recalls. What does that mean? What is a terminated recall? Let's find out. I'm fucking white trash, dude. What is a terminated recall? Terminated recall means that the FDA has determined that all reasonable efforts have been made to remove or correct the violative product, and proper disposition has been made according to the hazard level. Okay, so yes, it means that at one point it was totally justified to recall this, and they fixed the problem afterwards. You mitigated the risk with our money. You got money to mitigate the risk, and you still fucked up. You didn't mitigate the risk. That's the problem. It's fucking crazy to me. So what are you doing with the money then? Are you just wasting our money so you can get a stamp of approval by the FDA? Fuck, dude. Many of the drugs that have been approved in recent years are specialty drugs. Specialty drugs generally treat chronic, complex, or rare conditions, or they may also require special handling or monitoring of patients. Many specialty drugs are biologics, large molecule drugs based on living cell lines, which are costly to develop, hard to imitate, and frequently have high prices. Previously, most drugs were small molecule drugs based on chemical compounds. Even while they were under patent, those drugs had lower prices than recent specialty drugs have. Information about the kinds of drugs in current clinical trials indicates that much of the industry's innovative activity is focused on specialty drugs that would provide new cancer therapies and treatments for nervous system disorders such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. See, and this is what I'm saying is I don't mind taxpayers' dollars going to help fund these things. That's not an issue to me. That is not at nowhere along the line of, do I think the amount of money given to these companies should be cut? That's not what I'm saying. I understand that there's a lot of overhead with these things, and in order for us to develop new things, there has to be money shelled out. And I don't mind taxpayers' dollars going to this, but what I do fucking mind is Pfizer in 2022 making $31 billion, and then in 2023 making $21 billion, and then none of that money, which to a large degree, a lot of that profit was made by the COVID vaccines, and the COVID vaccines were entirely funded by taxpayers, and they fucking pocketed every penny of those profits. None of that was put back into like the benefit of the taxpayer. None of it at all. That's what I have the issue with. Drug companies' R&D spending decisions depend on three main factors: the anticipated lifetime global revenues from a new drug, the expected cost to develop a new drug, and policies and programs that influence the supply and demand for prescription drugs. See, like, the government shouldn't be putting policies, designing policies around drugs other than regulations when it comes to what these companies can put in there. Like, that's really it. You know, genuinely. Like, I that may be, you know, a fucking, like, low IQ take. I don't care. I mean, it really, there gets to be a point when you start to see how much of this money is fucking wasted. And how many people die because a drug comes out and it gets recalled because they didn't do enough studying on it. Like, look at Ozempic. Ozempic, I'm not saying that was funded by taxpayers' dollars, but it's just an example. That had to go through a process in order to get widely distributed. And people used it for long periods of time and had and not everybody, but like a lot of people had serious health consequences because of it. And there's no accountability from these companies. And all they can say is, well, we didn't know. That's not good enough. Not for me. Various considerations inform companies' expectations about a drug's revenue stream, including the anticipated prices it could command in different markets around the world and the expected global sales volume at those prices, given the number of people who might use the drug. The prices and sales volumes of existing drugs provide information about consumers and insurance plans' willingness to pay for drug treatments. Yo, when it comes to health insurance, I understand where Luigi came from when it came to his mindset on insurance companies, but I don't agree with people going out and just shooting people. That is not good, should not happen. But I understand where that frustration comes from. I mean, it's insane to me that they get away with this. They're given a red carpet. And, you know, people freak out about, well, Elon Musk and yada, 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 yada. And, like, you know, I get it. I'm not the biggest fan of Elon Musk, right? But why isn't anybody fucking infuriated about this? The prices and sales volumes of existing drugs provide information about consumers and insurance plans' willingness to pay for drug treatments. Importantly, when drug companies set the prices of a new drug, they do so to maximize future revenues net of manufacturing and distribution costs. So, when they set the prices of the drugs, they're doing it to have the most money flow through the company after the overhead of manufacturing and distribution. So they're not setting the prices to make them affordable to the consumer. They're solely, I mean, it says it right here. And this is the Congressional fucking Budget Office website, okay? They do so to maximize future revenues. Maximize future revenues. This is a for-profit industry. They don't deserve the glazing. Yes, they work hard. Yes, they save lives. But would they do it for free? A drug sunk R&D cost, that is, the cost also incurred in developing that drug, do not influence its price. A drug sunk R&D cost? Do you mean the taxpayers' dollars that go into this? So they're specifically saying right here, the amount of money that taxpayers put into this thing does not influence its price. Fuck you. Fuck you. Developing new drugs is a costly and uncertain process, and many potential drugs never make it to market. Only about 12% of drugs entering clinical trials are ultimately approved for introduction by the FDA. And what percentage of those get recalled because people have horrible reactions to them? In recent studies, estimates of the average R&D cost per new drug range from less than $1 billion to more than $2 billion per drug. So we just looked up, where is it? Less than $1 billion to over $2 billion went into each of these drugs. Each. Those estimates include the cost of both laboratory research and clinical trials of successful new drugs, as well as expenditures on drugs that do not make it past the laboratory development stage. Oh, isn't that interesting? So they get all this money even for drugs that don't even make it to the fucking market, that enter clinical trials but fail in those trials or are withdrawn by the drug maker for business reasons, or that are not approved by the FDA. So there's a, like, and see, this is the vague language. There, when it says they were withdrawn for business reasons, does that mean that they could put a drug out into the market that doesn't make them all that much money, that could help people, but they just don't do it because of the bottom line? And how many of these drugs like I'm probably looking like that Charlie meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where I have the board with all the things and all that. But I mean, I'm just reading this shit from the government. Like, this is a .gov page. This is not a, like, this isn't a YouTube video where, you know, some faceless dude is telling me all this shit. I'm reading it from their own fucking websites. Those estimates also include the company's capital costs, the value of other foregone investments incurred through the R&D process. Such costs can make up a substantial share of the average total cost of developing a new drug. The development process often takes a decade or more, and during that time, the company does not receive a financial return on its investment in developing that drug. Well, that's... How much of that is mitigated by the taxpayer? Congressional Budget Office. How much of that is mitigated? And we already know their losses are subsidized. Like, that's just wide out in the open. The federal government affects R&D decisions in 3 ways. First, it increases demand for prescription drugs, which encourages new drug development by fully or partially subsidizing the purchase of prescription drugs through a variety of federal programs, Medicare and Medicaid, and by providing tax preferences for employment-based health insurance. Second, okay, so why is the government increasing demand for these products through Medicare and Medicaid? Why are they? Wait, hold on. That's their. I mean, like, I know this isn't a priority list, but that's the fucking first one. They create demand for these pharmaceutical companies through massive, like, social healthcare programs like Medicare and Medicaid. They create the demand for them. They encourage the development. More money gets shelled to these companies. Second, the federal government increases the supply of new drugs. It funds basic biomedical research that provides a scientific foundation for the development of new drugs by private industry. Additionally, tax credits, both those available to all types of companies and those available to drug companies for developing treatments of uncommon diseases, provide incentives to invest in R&D. Similarly, deductions for R&D investment can be used to reduce tax liabilities immediately rather than over the life of that investment. So here's my question. Are these people able, and like, I could look this up. I might, right? I don't know this, but it's a fair question. Are they able to write off their R&D costs that they're spending with taxpayers' dollars? Are they able to do that? Is any of this shit being tracked, or is this just like is this shit just handed to them? Finally, the patent system and certain statutory provisions that delay FDA approval of generic drugs provide pharmaceutical companies with a period of market exclusivity when competition is legally restricted. See, that right there, that's corruption. The patent system and certain statutory provisions that delay FDA approval of generic drugs. So, our own system delays approval of delays FDA approval of generic drugs, and it gives these massive pharmaceutical companies a period of market exclusivity, which means they fucking own the market on that drug. And our law restricts competition. I mean, I don't need to fucking break it down for, like, they're just telling us. They're telling us. And they use a lot of big words. And they use a very cold and like, I don't want to say manipulative, but the way that they list these things, when most people would read through this, they'd go, okay, I get it. That's just how it is. But man, this blows my mind, dude. During that time, they can maintain higher prices on a patented product than they otherwise could, which makes new drugs more profitable and thereby increases drug companies' incentives to invest in R&D. So we the taxpayers, give them the money to invest in research and development and at least mitigate the highest risk aspect of it. They put this They utilized that money to, in the initial phases of the drug development, get through it. And who knows how much of this money's being wasted? Who knows where all this shit's going? There's no audit on any of these fucking... When's the last time anyone's audited the fucking healthcare industry? I mean, I can't remember any time in my life, you know? Like, there's specific companies that do fraud and the IRS comes in, but when it comes to, like, our taxpayers' dollars paying for this shit, I don't hear about that ever. And that should be the main priority. A guy making an extra $15,000 under the table because his main job can't afford to pay his rent and get him by should not be scrutinized by the IRS more than massive companies who are getting the tax dollars that the IRS is fucking taking bats to knees for. And we don't know how many of these fucking drugs fail. It's fucking baffling. Like when you take a very face value, I'm not even like diving deep down the rabbit hole here, right? Like, this is face value, the shit that they're just fucking telling us. I mean, like, they utilize that money to mitigate all the risk, and then because of our bloated, over-bureaucratic system, it gives them leniency to jack their prices up while all of their competition is restricted until FDA approval for the generics can get kicked through. Government isn't trying to change that. And it's funny how, you know, these people in our government, they're very fucking loud and very fucking proud of how they talk about how much they're fighting for the American people to lower drug prices and do all this, when it's the government that is allotting these companies time to fuck us even more. Third, some federal policies affect the number of new drugs by influencing both supply and demand. For example, going right back into the government, federal recommendations for specific vaccines increase the demand for those vaccines and provide an incentive for drug companies to develop new ones. Additionally, federal regulatory policies that influence returns on drug R&D can bring about increases or decreases in both supply and demand and demand for new drugs. Why is the government that is funded by the money we make giving more of the money we make to companies that profit off of it, and then also utilizing legislation to influence supply and demand, to essentially create a false market for these pharmaceutical companies? This is fucking crazy. Trends in R&D spending and new drug development. Private spending on pharmaceutical R&D and the approval of new drugs have both increased markedly in recent years, resuming a decades-long trend that was interrupted in 2008 as generic versions of some top-selling drugs became available and as the 2007 to 2009 recession occurred. In particular, spending on drug R&D increased by nearly 50% between 2015 and 2019. Many of the drugs approved in recent years are high-priced specialty drugs for relatively small numbers of potential patients. By contrast, the top-selling drugs of the 90s were lower-cost drugs with large patient populations. R&D spending. R&D spending in the pharmaceutical industry covers a variety of activities, including the following: invention, development. Invention, or research and discovery of new drugs. Research. That's the NIH pays for that. Development, or clinical testing, preparation, and submission of applications for FDA approval, and design of and design of production processes for new drugs. So here's another thing. Okay, so riddle me this, right? Our tax dollars fund the FDA. Our tax dollars fund the R&D. We fund the company that, or we not the company, we fund the institution, let's say, that is supposed to regulate these drugs and approve them and make sure they're safe and everything. And we're also paying for the clinical testing and the research and everything for these products. And then people die by the thousands every year of chronic diseases that they can't get the drugs. Like, somebody help me make this make sense. This is baffling to me. Incremental innovation, including the development, and this is all under the umbrella of R&D spending, okay? So this is taxpayers' dollars. I'm not saying it funds it 100%, but this is where our money goes, okay? And by the way, clinical testing, preparation, FDA approval, yada, 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 yada. 15,351 drug recalls in 13 years. Money that we spent to not only research, develop, and all of these drugs, to mitigate all of the fucking risk, not all of it, but like to money that was shelled to these companies to help them mitigate risk, and our money that was given to the FDA that is supposed to manage these things and make sure it's safe to be released to the public. All taxpayers' dollars. Not only do they create insane profit margins off of us, but they fail. They fail, people get sick, and people die. Incremental innovation, including the development of new dosages and delivery mechanisms for existing drugs and the testing of those drugs for additional indications, product differentiation, or the clinical testing of new drug against the existing rival drug to show that the new drug is superior. So, in incremental innovation, just as time goes on, tweaking the system. Okay, I get that, right? That's what I'm saying. I'm not against any of this. I'm not against the money going to this. Product differentiation. This is just, does this one work better? Does this one work better? Safety monitoring or clinical trials conducted after a drug has reached the market that the FDA may require to detect side effects that may not have been observed in shorter trials when the drug was in development. And they still get fucking recalled. In real terms, private investment in drug R&D among member firms of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, Big Pharma, right, in an industry trade association was about $83 billion in 2019, up from $5 billion in 1980 and $38 billion in 2000. Hold on, I gotta use the bathroom. All right, where were we? Uh, Actually, you know what? Hold on, hold on. I can get back to this. My blood pressure's getting high. I have a pug. His name's Charlie, and I give him the best kibble I can. Purina Pro Plan, at least to my knowledge. That's what all the vets tell me. I'm not a professional, so if someone has something better, fantastic. But this is what people who dedicated their lives to animals' health have told me, and so I just listen to what they have to say, right? Um, they probably fuck me too. Don't get me wrong, but it seems like this is the best thing for them, you know. But I always like to break a little bit of chicken breast up into his food. Makes him happy, and he eats all of it. He's my good boy. So sorry for the break here. I just um wanna hook my buddy up here. He's like my brother. You know what I mean? I'm not a dog dad. I'm a dog brother. That's the way I look at it. He's the brother that doesn't pay bills, and I guess you know just eats, and but I love him to death, man. He's such a good boy. You know, ain't that right, Charlie? You're a good boy. Don't worry, buddy. I'm breaking up some chicken right now for you. I see. So like Sam's Club rotisserie chickens. If you don't have a Sam's Club membership, I highly recommend it. And no, I'm obviously not sponsored by Sam's Club, but just if you're on the lower end of the spectrum like me, when it comes to money, um, these $5 rotisserie chickens they have there. I mean, I can spend $25 and I have food for a week. You know, just get some fucking canned vegetables and some rolls, a little butter. And it's fucking clutch. I got a bunch of stray cats that live out in my building, and sometimes I'll like whenever I'm breaking up the chicken, and if there's some bones with some chicken on it and stuff, I toss it out there because they don't eat the bones, but they tear all the meat off of them. If I ever leave because I'm fucking lazy sometimes, and uh, I'll just put like I'll throw the whole like chicken skeleton into trash bag, and sometimes I'll just like leave them outside my door, and the next time I go downstairs, I'll just take it down there and throw it in the trash. But uh, sometimes some cats will get up here and they'll tear a hole in it, and it's just fucking the breezeway out there is like a fucking graveyard. It's funny as shit. It's like the opposite of sky burial. There's just something funny about that to me. Anyway, but all right, Bubba, I got some chicken here, bears. Chicken, 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 chicken. Here you go, buddy. All right, let me wash my hands. Break this shit with my fingers. let's get back to my fucking anger fest. Okay. Although total R&D spending by all drug companies has trended upward, small and large firms generally focus on different R&D activities. Small companies not in pharma devote a greater share of their research to developing and testing new drugs, many of which are ultimately sold to larger firms. See box 1. Okay. We can read this after. This is a big fucking... This is a long page, man. I might break off from this just because I really... Like, I'm not going to break off now. There's still some more reading that I want to do into this on the Congressional Budget Office website, but just so far, looking through this, it is fucking crazy to me. Just the way that they talk about this. I mean, they're very, very open with how this system works, and it blows my fucking mind, right? Like, how what it seems like is the government is totally happy utilizing the money that they take from us to do these things, and then not only does the FDA approve it and then recall it later, but then people who are the head of the FDA immediately get jobs in these large pharmaceutical companies. And nobody will ever be able to convince me that there's no corruption involved in that whatsoever. Nobody. Like, you leave a public service position and immediately end up on the board of a massive company, probably making 8 figures a year. Even if you're making 7 fucking figures a year, that's insane to me. That is fucking insane to me. By contrast, a greater portion of the R&D spending of larger drug companies, including those in pharma, is devoted to conducting clinical trials, developing incremental line extension improvements such as new dosages or delivery systems, or the new combinations of 2 or more existing drugs, and conducting post-approval testing for safety monitoring and marketing purposes. Okay, so here's my thing, right? Like, what would be more beneficial to the people use of the tax money would be for the drug companies to put up their money during the risk. And then when the risk is assessed and you can make sure it's a safe investment, then taxpayers' dollars go into it. But it's the exact opposite, where taxpayers' dollars go into it, and it's, to them, in their mind, it's a totally justified waste of taxpayers' dollars because there's no risk assessed to them, right? They know that this money's just going to keep on coming in, and to me, it incentivizes them to waste more, to make bigger risks, to take bigger risks, right? That's the problem for me. Because, see, this is... Again, I'm not opposed to tax money that gets taken out of my check going to fund new, better medicines. But I am opposed to massive corporations taking tax dollars to mitigate the risk so they can safely invest their own money and then make a profit off of it. There's a fucking problem with that system. All right, here's box 1. This is what they were talking about earlier. When the research to developing and testing new drugs, many of which are sold to larger firms, right? Small drug companies, those with annual revenues of less than $500 million. Less than $500 million is a small drug company. That is fucking wild to me, now account for more than 70% of the nearly 3,000 drugs in phase 3 clinical trials. They are also responsible for a growing share of drugs already on the market. Since 2009, about 1/3 of the new drugs approved by the Food and Drug Administration have been developed by pharmaceutical firms with annual revenues of less than $100 million. Large drug companies, those with annual revenues of $1 billion or more, still account for more than half of new drugs approved since 2009 and an even greater share of revenues, but they have only initiated about 20% of drugs currently in phase 3 clinical trials. For a large drug company, one option for increasing the number of drugs it expects to introduce is to acquire a smaller firm that is developing new drugs. Over the past 3 decades, about 1/5 of drugs in development, or the companies developing them, have been acquired by another pharmaceutical company. When a large company acquires a small drug company or the rights to one of its drugs, it can use its specialized knowledge to increase the value of its acquisition or to diversify its risk of a decline in revenues from a drug's loss of patent protection, for instance. In making that acquisition, a large company might bring a drug to market more quickly than the small company could have, or might distribute it more widely. With the rise of generic drugs, the loss in sales revenues that occurs when a drug's patent expires can leave firms with excess capacity in production. Acquiring a smaller company can help quickly fill that capacity. The acquisition of a small company by a larger one can create efficiencies that might increase the combined value of the firms by allowing drug companies of different sizes in terms of the number of researchers, administrative employees, financial and physical assets to specialize in activities in which they have a comparative advantage. Small companies with relatively fewer administrative staff, less expertise in conducting clinical trials, and less physical and financial capital to manage can concentrate primarily on research. For their part, large drug companies are much better capitalized and can more easily finance and manage clinical trials. But wait, you're forgetting the fact that taxpayers' dollars are the ones that are used, and you said that just up here. Where was it that they said that earlier? Hold on. Wait. Was it in this one or was it in the other one? I think it was here. Yes, right here. Okay. So these drugs, the industry's investment comes after the initial phases where the risk of failure is high, in which the risk of failure is high and which are supported by public funds through research grants. So they mitigate all of their risk. Yes, they pay a lot of money into this. Don't get me wrong. I don't believe it's not like 100% of these drugs, like overhead that comes up front, is taxpayers' dollars. That's not what's happening. But all of the risk in the investment for the companies, for these companies, is mitigated with taxpayers' dollars. That's for a large drug company. One option for increasing the number of drugs it expects to introduce is to acquire a smaller firm that is developing new drugs. Over the past 3 decades, about 1/5 of drugs in development, or the companies developing them, have been acquired by another pharmaceutical company. When a large company acquires a small drug company or the rights to one of its drugs, it can use its specialized knowledge. Blah, 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 see, this is the thing right here. To increase the value of its acquisition or to diversify its risk of a decline in revenues. So they're getting taxpayers' dollars to mitigate these risks. In making that acquisition, a large company might bring a drug to market more quickly than a small company could have, or might distribute it more widely. With the rise in generic drugs, the loss in sales revenues that occurs when a drug's patent expires can leave firms with excess capacity and production. Acquiring a smaller company can help fill that capacity. So, I mean, we're just talking in figures that most people couldn't even possibly comprehend. And when they do this, when they buy these smaller companies, it's specifically as a business. See, this is the thing where, yes, I'm grateful for the things that a lot of these companies do, but they are just companies, right? They do not care about our benefit. And in order for these companies to make money, they need sick people. So these companies don't want a healthy population. Because with a healthy population, they don't make money. I'm not going to make any accusations or assumptions here, but that's just the fact of the matter. Take with that what you will, or do with that what you will. I mean, it's a very simple concept. It doesn't have to be expanded on. These massive corporations, these pharmaceutical corporations, thrive when more people are sick. And their profits have done nothing but go up as people in this country have gotten sicker. Those are facts. The acquisition of a small company by a larger one can increase efficiencies that might increase the combined value of the firms by allowing drug companies of different sizes in terms of number of research. Oh yeah, we already went through all this. My bad. For their part, large drug companies are much better capitalized and can more easily finance and manage clinical trials. But this is paid for with taxpayers' dollars. They're capitalized with taxpayers' fucking dollars already. They also have readier access to markets through established drug distribution networks and relationships with buyers. Researchers have found some evidence that such acquisitions by larger drug firms are sometimes motivated by large firms' desires to limit competition. Yeah. According to a recent study of acquisitions in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, a company was about 5% to 7% less likely to complete the development of drugs in its acquired company's pipeline if those drugs would compete with the acquirer's existing drugs than it would be otherwise. In a 2017 study of competition in research and development, the Government Accountability Office cited several retrospective studies of mergers in the drug industry that found such transactions reduced R&D spending and patenting for several years. That's great. We didn't spend as much, but the problem is not the amount that we're putting in. The problem is the profits these companies are making and there being no reciprocity. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The reverse was also true. Increases in pharmaceutical industry competition have been found to increase firms' R&D spending. So, for smaller companies that could potentially release the drug for cheaper, they're advocating for I'm not saying they're advocating for a monopoly here, but that's the direction this is leaning, right? It's saying the less competition there is in the market, the less taxpayers' money is going to go into it. But The problem is, the less competition there is in the market, the more profit the company that has restricted competition is going to make. And that money is not going to be given back in any kind of reciprocal fashion. CBO relied on the Pharma data because before 2008, the NSF survey did not include domestic firms' R&D spending outside of the United States. Both the so they weren't even keeping track of what they were spending like in other countries. Both the NSF and Pharma estimates reflect worldwide R&D spending by pharmaceutical companies with operations in the United States. NSF's estimates of R&D spending since 2008 suggest that Pharma members worldwide R&D spending constitutes about 75 to 85% of the industry total, depending on the year. All right. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for a dollar figure, a total. So we can see what percentage of taxpayers' dollars is being spent. Because that's where the money goes. That's where the money that the NIH and other orgs like that, NIAID, you know, that's what the government grants and subsidies are on, is the research and development. Research and development constitutes 75 to 85% of the industry total. So what's the dollar figure on all the money spent? And how much money is being given to these people? Because that's all included in revenue reports. All that research and development. And I'm very interested in seeing, I'd like to know if the money that's given to them by the American taxpayer is included in their revenue reports. If it is, everybody needs to know it. This is a hot button issue with a lot of people in the country. I mean, it's a big deal. You know, I have family right now. Someone I love very much. He's dying. He's on hospice, chronic COPD and emphysema. I had someone else that I loved very much die of the exact same thing back in 2018. She couldn't afford health care. And my family member that's currently dying can barely afford it. I mean, they're broke. You know, they're fighting, selling like what few assets they actually have. And to see taxpayers' dollars go into R&D spending, that constitutes 75 to 85% of the industry total of spending. We as the American people deserve to know what percentage of that spending is taxpayers' dollars. What percentage of money that is forcibly taken from our checks, or we can go to fucking jail. What percentage of that money, of that 75 to 85%, is taxpayers' dollars? And are these included on revenue reports? And the reason I think that's not widely public knowledge and why it isn't well known is because people would be burning down fucking hospitals if they saw this. That's what I believe. I genuinely believe that there's a large percentage of that 75% to 85% that's taxpayers' dollars. It's just that's what it looks like to me. And you can go on fucking, you can use AI, you can do all the research you want. It's it's not easy to find a specific dollar amount. And I'm not done yet. Just a heads up, okay? I think I've gotten enough out of this. I really do. I think I've gotten enough out of this Congressional Budget Office. They've really shined a good light on a lot of things. I haven't even. Who even knows how fucking. Like, this is insane. See, we're talking in hundreds of billions of dollars here. These graphs. The more they talk about revenues and everything, the more it just kind of fucking infuriates me. Okay, this is the Institute for New Economic Thinking, right? I have not read this article. Yeah, that's a fucking good picture, dude. I like that shit. Oh man, that's a good one, bro. Wow. Oh man, that's a creative. I like it. All right. Okay. Amid debates over costs and profits from a coronavirus vaccine, a new study shows that taxpayers have been footing the bill for every new drug approved between 2010 and 2019. I am disposed to ask, does teaching consist in putting questions? Indeed, the secret of your system has just this instant dawned upon me. Socrates in Economicus. Economicus. Okay. Economics by Xenophon. I don't know a lot of the old. Uh, oh, we got a helicopter going over top. The COVID-19 pandemic has transformed long-standing debates about the role of the public and private sectors in drug discovery and development from questions of optimal policy to questions of life and death. On one hand, it has dramatically demonstrated the public's dependence on biopharmaceutical companies for the discovery, development, manufacture, and distribution of drugs and vaccines that may quell the pandemic. On the other hand, the billions of dollars of public funding demanded by the private sector to pursue these products vividly illustrates the industry's reliance on public funding for development of products that address the public's most pressing needs. The escalating controversies of divisive commentaries over drug pricing and the prioritization of products that benefit from federal funding also highlight deep divides between the precepts of public and private sectors concerning the mission of the corporation as well as the role of the government in value creation and markets. Yes, that's what we were looking at when it came to the CBO on the corporations utilize the tax dollars to mitigate the risks in order to make safe and to ensure safe investments for themselves, and the government literally creates supply and demand for these fucking products. In value creation and markets, these conflicts also highlight the lack of coherent policies designed to maximize the public return on taxpayer investments and ensure that the public's needs are met. Part of the problem is that the dialogue around drug discovery and development. Hold on, let me make sure my stream's still up. We good? We good? We good. All right. Part of the problem is that the dialogue around drug discovery and development is dominated by studies of private sector investment in the biopharmaceutical industry, the economics of the industry, and the efficiency of the penultimate stages of clinical development, regulatory review, marketing, and sales. Less is known about the public sector's investment in drug discovery or development, or the role of the government in promoting new drugs for treating or preventing disease. Less is known about this. That's very, very true. But they were pretty fucking bold to put a lot of this information on a government website. And it's not like hidden. You know what I mean? Like, this is just out there. But see, I think a lot of people today, they don't want to take the time to read through these kinds of things, because people have shit to do, right? Today's Sunday. I ain't working. I ain't doing dick. I'm just hanging around the house. So that's why I'm here reading this crazy, being crazy and reading this shit, okay? With support from the Institute of New Economic Thinking, we have recently completed a working paper examining the public sector investments by the NIH that contributed to new drugs approved by the FDA in the decade 2010 to 2019, This work, which builds on an earlier study of drugs approved in the first part of the decade, provides a rich data set describing the role played by the government in promoting new drug discovery and development. See, now, I knew when I saw this, right, I knew this was going to be something that was a little more theoretical, and that's why I went over these two first, to get like a kind of factual basis for how I can go through this article and see what, like, to have a reference point necessarily, okay? The scope of the public sector's contribution to drug discovery and development identified in his study is somewhat, I think they meant to put in this study, is somewhat overwhelming. Our analysis found that on identifying HIN, do they mean NIH? Funded research associated with 356 drugs that were approved from 2010 to 2019, or their 219 distinct biological targets. We also examined the timelines of clinical development, proxy measures of their innovativeness or importance, and the patents resulting from the NIH-funded research. We identified 2.2 million published research papers relating to these drugs or targets, of which 21% acknowledged funding from the NIH, totaling 332,000 fiscal years of research funding, amassing more than $230 billion. Okay. So that's just what was acknowledged, and that's 21% of this 2.2 million research papers, okay? This research was also cited in 22,000 issued U.S. patents. What does this research teach us about the role of the public sector's investment in drug discovery and development? Like the Socratic method, this analysis may be more informative from the questions it poses rather than the answers it provides. I like that. Here are some of the questions. What are the goals of NIH investments in drug discovery and development? While the stated mission of the NIH is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability, our analysis identified relatively little direct investment in drug development. We identified 244,000 publications directly related to these drugs, of which 16% acknowledged NIH funding totaling $36 billion. In contrast, we identified 2 million publications related to the biological targets for these drugs, of which 21% acknowledged NIH funding totaling $195 billion. I'd like to see how they went through 2 million publications. 2/3 of the research funding we identified for the investigator-initiated research projects or research program projects and centers that provide research infrastructure, and less than 1/3 was related to government-initiated and managed cooperative agreements and intramural research. This pattern of funding is consistent with the linear model of innovation that underlies federal science policy. In this model, there is a flow of fundamental knowledge from publicly funded basic science, sometimes referred to as scientific capital, to private industry, which provides the economic capital investments and technical capabilities required for drug development, manufacture, and marketing. In our study, we found that every one of the new drugs approved from 2010 to 2019 was developed and distributed by companies which are estimated to invest as much as $1.5 billion on average in each new product launched. There are, however, other goals inherent in federal funding. Yes, so $1.5 billion on average from the drugs that they've studied was the amount of taxpayers' money that went into these drugs. There are, however, other goals inherent in federal funding which are not stated by the NIH mission statement, but rather the Bayh-Dole Act, which governs the transfer of what NIH-funded research from nonprofit institutions that receive NIH funding to industry. The stated objective of the Bayh-Dole Act include to promote the utilization of inventions arising from federally supported research and development, to ensure that inventions made by nonprofit organizations and small business firms are used in a manner to promote free competition and enterprise, to promote the commercialization of public availability of inventions made in the United States by United States industry and labor, to ensure that the government obtains sufficient rights in federally supported inventions to meet the needs of the government and protect the public against non-use or unreasonable use of inventions. So, the Bayh-Dole Act doesn't do anything, apparently, because what it's saying here is the Bayh-Dole Act promotes free competition and enterprise, but yet our own government, I'm going too far down. Our own government limits the competition. That's what we were just reading here. So they limit the competition to keep these companies from spending more money. But the more money that these companies that don't have the competition make higher profits. It is unequivocally how that works. They've created an entire market that they themselves utilize and abuse. Are the goals of federal funding achieved? There was a steady increase in the number of new drugs approved through the decade 2010 to 2019, and we identified NIH funding for research associated with every one of these drugs or their biological targets. 41% of these products were categorized as being first in class, meaning that they were associated with a novel biological target or mechanism that was uncovered by basic research. In this context, NIH funding is associated with a robust pipeline of new drugs. Our analysis also suggests that the NIH is remarkably efficient at funding research that is utilized in the discovery or development of new drugs commercialized and publicly available. Yes, that is the NIH reporter. We're going to go for a little scroll just to let you know. All right. The $230 billion in NIH funding 2000 to 2019 that was directly or indirectly related to these drugs represents 40% of NIH budget allocations over this period. Furthermore, the NIH has a stated strategy of dedicating half of its research budget to basic research, and $195 billion in NIH funding that was characterized as basic research in our study represents more than 65% of this total. Our study does not, however, address the question of whether the NIH achieved its broader goal to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. Historically, new drugs are important drivers of improved health outcomes and longevity. Previous research has shown that new drugs approved from 1990 to 2009 contributed to an increase in longevity of 1.27 years by 2009, representing 70% of the total increase of longevity over that period. Nor did our work address the question of whether these government investments achieve the goals of promoting enterprise as well as the United States industry and labor. Indicators suggest that the biopharmaceutical industry, which is largely enabled by government investments in basic research, is thriving. No shit, dude. From 2000 to 2019, U.S. spending on pharmaceuticals increased $253 to $345 billion. Okay, so it went up about 50%, roughly. Little under 50%. Research on drug expenditures from 1996 to 2013 shows that this increase was driven primarily by increasing utilization of drugs, 6.7% annual growth, consistent with an increase in the number of new drug approvals and the emergence of drugs for previously untreatable conditions. Increased spending on pharmaceuticals, however, also reflects increases in drug costs, 3.9 annual growth, and population growth, 3.1 annual growth, which have little to do with pharmaceutical innovation. So wait, if the increases in drug costs have little to do with the innovation, they need to stop charging us as much. It's pretty fucking simple. The increase in pharmaceutical sales has also generated enormous profits for the pharmaceutical industry. In another study, we recently showed that from 2000 to 2018, 35 large pharmaceutical companies had cumulative revenue of $11.5 trillion and a net income earnings of $1.9 trillion. $1.9 trillion fucking dollars that they net earned, which is profit, covers all the overhead of everyone involved. They made $2 trillion. How much of that, what percentage of their overhead capital was taxpayers' dollars? What fucking percentage? Because that same percentage needs to be taken out of that 1.9. Very simple. Very simple. I mean, that's fair. I think that's fucking fair, right? I think that is reasonable. And instead of taking it out of a gas station attendant or a restaurant server or, fucking city worker's check or whatever, take the percentage of the taxpayers' money that funded that $1.9 trillion in earnings, take the same percentage that we paid the capital, we mitigated the risk, we covered your ends and gave you a safe investment. That same percentage of your profits needs to go back to the people. Not a fucking hard line, dude. It's a very reasonable stance to take. Before you start taking money out of people's checks, take it from these fucks. It's not even a socialist-like way of thinking. We fucking paid for it. We did. Use it to help us. I want my tax dollars going to help people in this country. That's what I want. Nothing else. At the very least. See, and that's the thing, okay? So, more tax money, I truly believe that more of our tax money is given than they make in profits. So that's why I don't ask for the dollar amount given back, because I understand it costs a lot of money to develop these things. But whatever percentage of your initial capital, especially when we're the ones that are mitigating the risk for these companies, whatever percentage of the profits you make off of this, after everyone's paid, after everything's been said and done, the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, once it's all done, that same percentage, let's say taxpayers' dollars covers 50% of the capital required for them to develop a drug. Okay? And let's say they make $500 billion in profit. I know that's a lot of money, but what I'm saying is just hear me out. We paid 50% of the overhead. So you take $250 billion of that profit and you invest it into our healthcare system. Not invest it. You give it back to us. the government can do with that money to make things cheaper for everybody. To what degree will that make things cheaper? Who gives a fuck? It's the fact that there's some reciprocity in the money that we're giving to these corporations. Easy. I think that's a fucking great starting point. And it's not tough. The government writes the contracts that these companies get. They fucking write them. If the government actually gave a shit about us, they would have done this a long time ago. They don't care, though. Moreover, that study also showed that large pharmaceutical companies had median net income margins of 13.8%, significantly greater than those of large corporations in the S&P 500, 7.7%, and similar to those of other research-driven companies. That is not even, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what your net income is, right? Because the net income is after all the overhead. It doesn't matter what percentage of your revenue is net income. It doesn't matter. Because to me, that 13.8, that is 100%. If we cover 50% of your overhead, we mitigate your risk in the research and development process. I want 50% of that 100% to go back to the people. It's very fucking simple. Like, for instance, when someone takes out an SBA loan, you got to pay that back. The taxpayers gave you that loan, and rightfully you have to pay it back. But most people who are taking out an SBA loan are taking out an SBA loan because they don't have the initial capital to fund it. And the loan in and of itself is a risk. We're funding them to mitigate their risks. They said that in, well, it was the oncology news, but I mean, they're very, like, this is a doctor, what was his name? Gyawali? Bishal Gyawali, MD, PhD. This guy says it himself. Often the industry's investment comes after the initial phases, in which in the initial phases, the risk of failure is high, and these are supported by public funds through research grants. So we are paying to mitigate their risks. I've had two businesses. Both failed. I took a risk, I stepped out on my own, and it didn't fucking work. Maybe I'm just a bad businessman, right? Like, that is what it is. But you know what I didn't do? I wasn't allotted the special privilege of the American taxpayer to fund my failure. Free of charge. I didn't get an SBA loan. The taxpayers didn't pay for that. No one mitigated that risk for me. If someone could come up with a good reason why that should even possibly be a thing, I would love for them to explain that to me. Explain it to me like I'm 5, you know? I'm pretty fucking dumb. That's what's crazy about all this. I am not like a super fucking smart guy, okay? I'm a lower class average dude. But I still understand how we're all getting fucked by this. In a free market, this doesn't exist. You have to allot room for failure. And we're the ones who are propping these massive companies up. And we're the ones who are dying by the thousands every year of sickness. People who can't afford these drugs that we already fucking pay for. Let's keep going. All right. Are NIH investments in biomedical science creating public value? Yes. That's a quick answer. Of course they are. There can be no question that NIH investments in basic biomedical science are creating value in the form of new medicines for treating disease and economic activity. It is less clear that the final goal of the Bayh-Dole Act is being achieved, namely whether the government obtains sufficient rights in federally supported inventions to meet the needs of the government and protect the public against non-use or unreasonable use of inventions. We have several concerns. They haven't done much, dude. Like, our first concern is whether the patents that result from NIH-funded research and structure of the Bayh-Dole Act are sufficient to achieve these goals. While we identified 22,000 issued patents resulting from research that was directly or indirectly related to drugs approved from 2010 to 2019, only 567 of these patents were listed in Orange Book as contributing to the market exclusivity of approved products, and only 27 of the 311 study drugs included in this database were protected by these patents. Some of these patents are related to drugs approved prior to 2010. Thus, inasmuch as the measurable economic value of the patents relates to its ability to provide marketing exclusivity, which provides greater revenue and profit for the patent holder, only a very small number of patents would be deemed to be contributing to economic value. A similar problem arises in accounting. Patents that are only indirectly related to new drugs represent intangible assets rather than tangible assets, and thus do not contribute to the calculated value of the corporation or its shareholders. I need some water. My throat's drying up. I'm like a fucking raisin right now. Hold on. Okay. Brita filters. If I were ever to run for office, free Brita filters for everybody. It is so necessary. The problem is compounded by the fact that basic research may not lead to disclosure of a subject invention, which is the trigger for application of the Bayh-Dole Act. A subject invention is defined in the Act as any invention of a contractor conceived or first actually reduced to practice in the performance of work under a funding agreement. Let me read that again. Any invention of a contractor conceived or first actually reduced to practice in the performance of work under a funding agreement. An invention, however, requires the researcher to recognize a functional purpose or usefulness of the invention and provide information sufficient for those skilled in the art to reduce it to practice without the exercise of extensive experimentation or the exercise of inventive skill. Based on basic research, which is defined by the National Science Foundation as being undertaken without any particular application or use in view, may not meet this utility requirement. Furthermore, since the translation of basic scientific discoveries into successful products often requires extensive investments of time, talent, and capital, the fruits of basic research may not satisfy the enablement standards. Interesting. So we have no idea how much fucking money is being shelled out to this. We can't even really get a basic idea of what they're using money for that's failing back to back to back to back to back. It has to read a certain criteria for that Bayh-Dole Act to even go into effect. Our concern, therefore, is that the Bayh-Dole Act may not even apply to most of the research being funded by the NIH. There you go. Without engaging in legal interpretations of the government's Martian rights associated with the Bayh-Dole Act and whether they may be triggered in response to high drug prices or limited availability of a drug, if the patents resulting from NIH funding are not material to a company's exclusivity, then triggering Martian rights to these patents may not have any effect on the company's exclusive rights. Exclusive rights to market a product and set its sorry. So they must have just doubled that up. To these patents may not have any effect on the company's exclusive rights to market a product and set its price. While the needs of the government may be met by other mechanisms such as the Defense Production Act, if the Bayh-Dole Act does not apply, there are few other mechanisms to meet the public's need for protection against non-use or unreasonable use of government-funded research. It's a blank check, essentially. That's what I gained from that. That's what that sounds like to me. These fucking massive corporations are given a blank check, and as long as they don't meet a specific criteria with certain research or R&D costs that they put out there, there's nothing in place to stop them from abusing the funds. Well, we'll research this, and we'll research this, and we'll research this. Don't get it far enough along the line to where the Bayh-Dole Act comes in. It's just like it draws a line in the sand for them to go, well, we can utilize as much as we need up until here. Second, we are concerned about how the financialized biopharmaceutical industry balances creation of shareholder value, and that's an issue, right? Something that is publicly funded to a large degree, especially when it comes to mitigating risk, should not be on the stock market. That's just my own personal opinion. People will disagree with that. That's fine. But that's like if the government was on the fucking New York Stock Exchange. You know? Like, that to me, that's from my fucking pea-brain, low IQ perspective, that's how that comes across to me. The value resulting from improving health outcomes. Studies over the past decades consistently demonstrate that increasing co-payments result in lower utilization of health resources and compromise health outcomes. So the more we pay, the less effective it is. Thus, corporations that seek to maximize shareholder value by aggressively pricing their products will necessarily reduce the health value resulting from these products. So the higher the prices go, the less effective they are. This in turn reduced the health impact of the NIH funding that contributed to their discovery and development. And all the risk is mitigated by this. The concept that companies have an obligation to maximize shareholder value is increasingly challenged by both the business and academic communities. There are, however, no systemic mechanisms for monitoring how companies choose to balance profits and people, either by embracing a stakeholder perspective on value maximization, creating shared value, or prioritizing social responsibility as a corporation mission. Yeah, they can go fuck themselves. Mission statements is such bullshit. Mission statement is just PR. That's all it is. That's all it ever will be. That's not how these companies roll. It's simply like corporate propaganda. That's literally what a mission statement is. All right, I needed that. Finally, also unclear is whether the return on investments to government as an investor of first resort in the earliest stages of biopharmaceutical innovation, the risk mitigation, the highest risk of failure, is commensurate with the risk of these investments. The government's return on investment is largely indirect and is commonly assessed by the health value created by the products. The estimated value. So their justification for helping these companies mitigate risk is what you get back is higher quality products, like higher quality medications. That's great and all, but if no one can fucking afford them, and they've shown that the higher the prices go on the drug, the less effective they are. I mean, these drug companies are two things: greedy and beholden to their shareholders. That's it. They don't care about the effectiveness of their drugs anymore. This is specifically saying this, and it tracks with everything we've read so far. Manzicotto has argued that indirect measures may be inadequate and that more attention should be paid to assuring direct returns from the licensing of government-funded technologies to industry comparable to those of early investors. Given the scale of the public sector investments identified in our work, there is an acute need for methods that will adequately measure these multivarious forms of value, policies that provide the public with an equitable balance of risk and reward, and a framework that equitably prioritizes alternative forms of value in response to the public's most pressing needs. In an era of both COVID and economic uncertainty, I believe that's what they meant to put there are hard choices to make. 1. Note that the Orange Book includes only drugs approved by the Center of Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA, not the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, and does not include biological products. All right. What? Ad blocker? Me? No. No. Alright, let's take a look at this. Here it is. The NIH reporter. Fiscal year 2004. Just for an example. It's not all from the NIH. Different sectors of it. This is the money showdown. Are you ready? spending. You spend that tax money, goddammit. Don't you stop. Keep going. Don't stop there, Big Gov. Don't stop there. You have stock portfolios to You better keep going. That's right. You better keep going. Line those pockets, Congress. That's right. You better fucking You better keep going. Keep going, goddammit. Don't stop. That's right. That's right. Keep spending that money. Keep pumping it out. By the way, it keeps going. It doesn't stop there. And just for a reference point, this is fiscal year 2024. All of the NIH funding, that's what this is, reporter.nih.gov. You can go on there and look at this yourself. Oh, no, it just had to load some more. Look, I mean, of course, like a lot of this is going to schools and stuff. I understand this is necessary, right? I understand that. But just, Charlie, come here, Bubba. I kind of scared him with the meme there. I understand that it's incredulous amounts of money that have to be put into this. I get that. But when you take everyday people like me, I'm just a regular fucking dude, and you show this is the amount of money that's taken out of the American taxpayers' dollar checks and given to these massive companies, schools for research, all that, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But they spend all of this money, and this research is used for massive corporations to make billions of dollars in profit. I get that it's necessary. It's totally understandable how it's necessary. But companies should not be able to first jack their prices up to where people can't even afford these fucking medicines. And as the research shows, the higher the prices go, the less effective these drugs are. And they're doing it because they're beholden to shareholders. But fuck your shareholders if your risk is mitigated by the American taxpayer. I think that's very fair. I don't feel like I'm very out of pocket for that take. But anyway, that's all I got on this. I'm going to go relax. My blood pressure has been through the roof. This has been fun. I'll be streaming again tomorrow. So, please tune in. I will see you all then. Thanks, guys.